everybody. Want to give you guys a little talk on basic grinding technique. A lot of miscommunication and misunderstandings I see online on this. There's a bunch of things that are just plain science and can't be changed. And then there's a bunch of technique to learn. So I'm going to start with the basic techniques. First thing, when you're doing a knife, doesn't matter what the knife is, any knife, the absolute first thing you have to do is grind the profile. And you can use an older belt, 36 grit's fine. I suggest if you're doing it before heat treat that you take the knife and run lengthwise this way, even at fairly high grits, because it just reduces the likelihood of cracking. The one thing you never want to do on a grinder though is grind with the tip up this direction, because if that accidentally catches that joint in the belt, knife's going to come at your thigh. That's probably going to be a bad day. Once you have the profile grinding, we need to set that profile first so that we know where all the tapers need to end. Then we can start to grind down for thickness. The one area I avoid early on is right here, because I want as much choice in here as possible. So I never grind this inside corner of the ricasso until after I've ground the plunges in. But once you have this out of profiled, the first thing you're going to do is walk up to the grinder and with a fairly loose grip, one hand like this, and I like to use this. You can also use a push stick. I learned without a push stick, so I just use my finger. You want a fairly loose grip, and you want to come to the grinder flat and then apply pressure. So you kind of let it loose until you find that level where that's touching the belt all the way across. Then apply pressure and start to go across so that you're grinding flat on all the sides. If you want to thin the edge versus the spine, don't start setting new facets, because that just makes it hard to chase. What you want to do is move your thumb a little higher up instead of the middle here, and put pressure to the top so that you're pushing more on the top than the bottom. And that will take more material off the top than the bottom. The opposite is true. If your edge is a little thin and you want to take a punch out of your spine, then you move your thumb to the bottom, keep it in contact all the way, and push downward. That little bit of twist will take more material off one side or the other. Once you have that ground in pretty even on one side, you're going to reverse your grip and do the same on the other. Now for me, I find it hard to do plunges. I always have. I leave those for after. So the first thing I do is I grind the majority of this out flat and centered on the ricasso. I square the ricasso up by either going diagonal or straight up and down. It's easier to keep a flat diagonal. If you try to square the ricasso this way, it's very easy to dig it in one of these directions. If you go diagonal, you can touch, let it come flat, and then press. Same thing with straight up and down. Press. And that way you get a much flatter, squarer section. When you're building a knife like this wants to be reasonably square. If it's not reasonably square, you're going to have problems later on. So once I have all that set, then I can start to center this on that line there. And sometimes I'll even scribe a center line to the middle of my ricasso. Once I have that pretty well squared, then to get my plunges dialed in, I'll use a table. I'll put the table on the grinder like this, and I have a table that has cutouts so that my knife can sit on both sides. And I set like this, and now all I have to worry about is this direction and this way, not this way as well. And what I do when I do this is I use a push stick. It can be anything. I use a piece of wood. This is a Sharpie. I come in, let it come to the top, and if I want to take more off the edge, I move my push stick up high. So it's sitting here, and then I pull across. I go whoop, and I center all that up. And when I want to get this, I track the belt a little over that edge, and I bump it over, boom, 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 until that plunges right where I want. Then I reverse, track the belt the other way, and get the center. Now this is where a good grinder comes in handy, because if you're trying to do this on the grizzly, where the belt keeps moving on you, pain. You can do it, but it's pain. If you're doing it on a baiter where the two sides don't match even a little bit, that's a whole nother thing. If you do have a baiter or one of the grinders that don't have a very good platen, I suggest making a hard platen, either a sleeve or something to slip over the top, just to do your plunges on. Make a huge difference. This is a Fear, and the Fear is great. My KMG works really well for this as well. Any grinder that can track well and has a nice flat platen works perfectly fine for this. So once you have that all dialed in and down to, you know, dimes width, then it's ready for heat treat. After heat treat, now all of that I would do with a 36, I would clean up with a 120, and then after heat treat, I would come back to the 120, 220, 400, done. And hopefully, when that's at that point, you have something that looks more or less like this. You'll notice this has a slight rounding at the edge, and this is ready for hand sanding. The reason for that is that I always do a radius to the last third of the knife, and I do that on a slack belt here. I just push in, drag across. And I do that so that the last little bit of my edge is radiused. It makes it a little bit stronger while still removing that mass behind the edge and giving me a very narrow bevel to sharpen. You know, right now this is probably 8 thousandths. Once I'm done hand sanding, it'll be down below 5. And then it's just 2-3 passes on the diamond hole and sharpen. So that's another really good basic technique, is the slack belt. A lot of people are afraid to use up here. You can just take the platen out and use the platen area without the platen in place. If you're doing that, or if you're up here, you have to remember that to make that work, you need to push the belt in so it's deflecting. The closer you are to a wheel, the more it'll take off of that side. If I'm in the middle here, you can see the radius is pretty even. So it's going to take here and here fairly evenly. I can force that a little bit by putting more weight to one side, take a little more off the edge, or I can come up near this edge, this belt rather, and push in. You see how the radius back here is much shallower than here, because this is preventing it. So you can control that radius using that. The same is true here. Once I have this all polished out and ready to hand sand, sometimes I'll go over it with a Scotch-Brite belt. That'll help smooth the lines and make sure there's no big issues. The real common mistake people make, and it's called the 2-inch mark, where you come in and you're so focused on paying attention to here, you forget what's happening on the other side, and you put a dig right here. I get it all the time. This one doesn't seem to have it too bad, but the way to fix that is to cross the divot. So if you're grinding like this, it's just going to follow along in that groove. You want to just take it a little bit, like 30 degrees, and grind through it like this. And be careful not to knock into your flat ricasso. But once you do that, then you'll get rid of that little divot. And then you can come back this way wherever you grind, and it'll be much easier to hand sand. Hand sanding is entirely about what's underneath it. How difficult it is to hand sand a knife is how good the grind is. If the grind is great, 5 minutes, you're done. If the grind sucks, 2 hours at 120, and you're fixing all your grind mistakes. Getting good at basic grinding techniques helps hand sanding vastly. So I hope that was helpful, guys. Go for it. Any questions you got, please put them in the comments, and I'll try to answer them in my next video. I am going to follow this up probably next week with a video on the more advanced grinding techniques, little tricks that I've come up with to make things go faster, but are sort of risky. So I wanted to put this out there first so you have a little basis of grind ideas. One little side, just before I forget, things that you never want to do with grinding. Basic rules here. You want to make sure you're putting enough pressure. A lot of people just kind of sit there and kiss at it. That's going to dull the abrasive very, very quickly. You can turn the abrasive down, that's fine, but you need enough pressure to break that abrasive. I like a nice ceramic belt. These are Firestorms. These are great belts. In the shop we're using Norton Blazes right now. Those are awesome belts. I've used 3M in the past. Any good ceramic belt will work. But whatever the belt is that you turned out to be your favorite, make sure that you're pushing hard enough to keep that belt fresh. you can use the belt for a long time if you don't glaze it. If it does get glazed, take a piece of high carbon steel or tungsten carbide and just go right across as hard as you can and break that grain back up. Sometimes that'll bring it back, not always. The other thing you want to make sure is when you're not hovering. Hovering destroys knives because you dig holes and you take out the heat treat. The thing with grinding you have to always remember is you're not trying to remove the spot, you're trying to remove everything else from the spot. The spot is your lowest point. So if you have a hammer mark right here, everything else has to go down below that hammer mark. Don't grind the spot, grind around the spot. The other thing you need to remember is not to dig a corner, because it's very easy to just go crazy fast by just going oops, and then you've just destroyed that edge. All grinding is about pressure. So if you concentrate that force, you're going to eat the blade away where you don't want it to. So grinding, you need to be controlled pressure. Come in, loose, touch, apply lots of pressure, come across. Lock your body and move with your hips like this, so you get a smooth motion. I see a lot of people who are starting out way back here like this, and they're up here and they're bouncing because they're not at their core. You want to make sure you have leverage on it and you're looking down over it so you can see. Put a baseball cap on, some safety glasses so you don't get burned. No problems. All right, guys. Hope that helps. Like I said, anything any questions, put them in the comments, and I'll do my best to answer them for you. See you on the flip side.